Welcome to our in-home fellowships, and we are so excited to be with you all this evening. This is the very, very last of our series on relationship keys, and man, it's been a good study.
It's been fun.
I've really enjoyed getting to talk through these with all the different members of our church family and our clubhouse kids, and I think it's been a good study and something that I hope you'll revisit sometimes. It's not just that we'll hear this once and be completely done. It's something that we can always come back to and be encouraged in our spiritual walk. Week number 1, we started off with learning about forgiveness and the importance that both extending forgiveness has in a relationship, as well as trying to be around people that will forgive, and that would be a good thing to do. So we talked about that in week 1. Week number 2, we talked about being real or open, honest, vulnerable, and the importance that that plays, that we shouldn't be those that just put on a facade around others, but instead we should seek to be real with others. And we heard about even from James 5, confessing our faults one to another and asking for help, being like Jesus, who said, my soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. So having that openness and that honesty. Week number 3, we learned about having integrity and just how important it is to have the entirety of our character be honest and just be someone that will always do right with others, and on behalf of others. We learned technically a week and a half ago about being enjoyable, and that was a great lesson, just having the Spirit live His fruit through our life and having that come out, and it makes us an enjoyable person to be around. And then this past week, we learned about being nice. And that was a great lesson on kindness and generosity, and just a really important lesson. And then tonight, what are we learning about, Pastor Dennis?
Well, tonight we're learning the word devoted, and we're going to talk through this word devoted. But, before we even look at the word devoted, I just want to say this, that every single one of us, when we talk about these topics that we've looked at, every one of us want those things. Yes. We want these things in a relationship. And so since we want these things, we should desire to be these things. Absolutely. And so I hope that through this whole series that you would ask the Lord to maybe show you areas in your life where there hasn't been forgiveness, or someone being you being real, or having integrity, or being enjoyable, being nice, whatever the decision is. And then, like Pastor Brian said, I hope that you would take some time to even go revisit these. They're on our YouTube page, and I believe there's some links on our website even that you can get that. So I'd encourage you to do that. But tonight we're going to wrap everything up with our growth groups or our in-home fellowships, whichever you're at, and which is the same thing. But
sure.
Maybe you picked a group that you're going to that's not your growth group or whatever. But anyway, we are doing the word devoted. When we talk about being devoted, I want to talk this evening or today about being devoted. Number 1, being devoted to God in our friendships. And then number 2, being devoted to bringing God into our friendships and having that devotion to friends. And so we're going to kind of talk through that. When you talk about the word devoted, there's some other words that you can use: the word loyal, the word faithful, the word true, the word loving, the word caring. But then I like the word dedicated, a dedicated friend. And so we're going to kind of walk through what that means. And of course, the greatest example that we have in this, all throughout Scripture, is Jesus Christ. And the Bible actually says this in John chapter 15 and verse number 12 and verse number 13. It says this commandment, of course, Jesus speaking, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." When you think about a friend that is devoted to the relationship and devoted to the good of the relationship, the good of the friendship, there is no greater example than Jesus. And Brian, what are some ways that we see devotion from Jesus toward us in our relationship with Him?
Yeah, I think Philippians 2 talks about this in a great way. that Jesus, even though he was God, even though he had all the splendor of heaven and all the worship of the angels, he didn't say, "Oh well, this is good for me. They'll find their own way to salvation. They'll find their own way to God." Instead, he came and he took upon him the form of a servant and was made in the likeness of man. And it says, being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And for many of us, it's been said, we say we love people, but there are very few people that we would ever say, "I will die for you." And
Right. Jesus
Jesus showed his devotion through that. He showed his devotion through spending time with people. He could have just said, "Hey, okay, here's a manuscript, tells you that I love you, and you go have fun
Yeah,
with that."
see
But
you
he
later.
spent time with people. He
Right.
spent years with fighting and feuding fishermen and publicans and traitors and zealots. He spent time with people, and he devoted himself to them in that way. And then he devoted himself to benefiting our lives. So I think he's given us the gift of the Spirit. That what an inestimable gift that is.
Right.
He has given us spiritual gifts through the Holy Spirit that we're able to exercise. He's given us a church family that we're spiritually one with, according to his prayer in John 17 and 18, that we are made one with all believers, and we're never truly alone in this world. And I think all of those are just beautiful pictures of the way that Jesus is devoted to us.
Yeah, and they're all an incredible example of ways that we should be devoted in our friendships. As Pastor Brian and I sat down and planned all of this out, when we talk about being devoted, man, there was so many different directions we could
Yes.
go, right? And I want to kind of speak to many directions real quick, and then we'll bring the focus in as we close things out. But when we talk about a devoted friend, and you think about all the ways that Jesus has been devoted in our lives, what an example that is for us with our relationships and our friendships. When I think of a devoted friend, and I think of Jesus' example, here's what stands out to me. Mm-hmm. Jesus never quit on his friends.
Nope.
Like even when they abandoned him,
Yep.
like he was faithful. And I think of John 21. Here's Peter. We've already talked about this story, but here's Peter having denied Jesus, and yet Jesus offers forgiveness and just brings him back and I see that as a devoted person to a friendship. And go ahead.
It makes me think of the verse in, I think it's 1 John 3, if we are faithless, yet he remaineth
Yeah.
faithful. And I think that's a great
Yeah, it is.
illustration
It's
of
a
that.
great thought in that, just that his faithfulness continues. When I think of being a devoted friend, boy, we all have stories of times that we've let people down, right? We all have stories of times when we weren't as good of a friend as we could have been, and those people forgave us, and those people allowed us back in. And when I think of devotion, I think of that, being a faithful friend who's devoted to the friendship. When I think of devotion, I think of what we talked about a few weeks ago, being devoted to speak kindness into the relationship, not gossip outside of it. And again, we could take this a bunch of directions. But tonight, I really just want to take this. It's two thoughts, but they're both under the same topic. And that's back to the word I said a minute ago. Devoted can also be dedicated. Jesus, and Brian mentioned this a second ago, Jesus was dedicated to doing what is best for the relationship, and he was dedicated to bringing truth into the relationships and friendships. So today, as we think about devotion, and we're going to talk about this in our groups and in home fellowships or growth groups here in just a minute, but I think about being devoted in two specific areas with being dedicated to bringing Jesus into a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So here's the two areas. Number one, I think a real friend, okay, you're listening, a real friend is always going to be devoted to pointing people to Jesus. All right, if I'm going to be a real friend to those in my life that I have friendships with, I am going to be dedicated at trying to present Christ to them. Now, I'm not going to always be throwing Jesus at people in those friendships.
Yeah, a little bit, maybe less of a battering ram approach to it.
Right, yeah, less of just in your face and more of I am dedicated to do what I can to help you know Jesus like I know him.
Yeah.
And specifically, I'm thinking, again, about the people in our lives that don't know Christ. And when you think about being devoted, Brian, in this way, I'm devoted to bringing Christ into a relationship. What are some ways that all of us could incorporate this in our friendships in the community?
Sure.
And maybe friendships for the teens at school or for people at their workplace. Those of us that have friends that don't know Christ, what are some ways we stay devoted in bringing Jesus into the conversation?
Yeah, I think one good way would be from some of Paul's writings, not being ashamed. And that can be a big temptation for us it could be a number of reasons that we could shy away from telling someone, oh yeah, I was at church this weekend. I went to an in-home fellowship last night with my growth group. For the teens, some of you a few weeks ago, oh, what'd you do last week? Oh, I was at Bible camp. We can be tempted to be ashamed, and we can shy away from being loyal to Jesus, from being devoted to Jesus, and at the same time shirking a tremendous opportunity to be able to testify to someone else of, hey, I'm sacrificing my time and attention and devotion to God, and that could be something where someone goes, why would you do that? Why would you have that kind of interaction? So I think not being ashamed, Paul, the specific verse I'm thinking of, Paul in Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. There's the power of God to salvation to everyone that believes. I think
Paul's mindset in that passage is like, because of me knowing Christ, I owe it to people.
Yes.
Like, God has given me a message for them. I'm a debtor. Yes. I owe it to them.
Yeah.
And I was challenged years ago. My dad really helped me with this a long time ago. And, he just asked me, like, would my friends, if they ever stood before the Lord, like, would they ever be able to say, like, yes, Dennis told me.
Yeah.
And my dad wasn't saying it to, like, guilt me. It was like, hey, if you're a real friend, you're going to be devoted at telling people about Christ. So I think about devotion, about bringing Jesus into the conversation by being devoted to tell people about Jesus, kind of a witnessing thought. But then I also think about being devoted with our friends that do know the Lord.
Sure.
Being devoted or dedicated to pointing them to Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, when's the last time, and I was challenged with this at the youth camp I preached this last week.
Yeah.
I was really challenged with this. When's the last time, like, I just sat down with friends to talk about the goodness of God?
Yeah.
Like, just, I have some pastor friends, of course, there's up there Pastor Paul, who's a very good friend of mine. Yeah. And a couple of the really good conversations we had, and I had with a couple other pastors there, was just about, like, just things of the Lord. It wasn't ministry, it was just conversation about Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think a healthy friendship is going to have those good conversations. Hey, where are you reading that right now? What's God spoke to you about lately? Hey, who's somebody I can pray for? Hey, how can I pray for you? One of the most encouraging things I think in my life often right now that stands out to me is when somebody asks me how they can pray for me.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what can I pray? What's going on in your life that I can pray for? It stands out to me, just that spirit of devotion of I want to invest God into our friendship.
Yeah. Well, and I think Paul highlights some of that too in all of his epistles. In almost every single one, he gives a prayer request to the church that they can be praying for him because he wants them to begin cultivating that mindset of thinking about those things that they should be praying for. And I think that's a great thought.
Yeah. So the challenge tonight, or today, just with you and the growth group, and we've talked about being devoted, I just want to ask you a question that we're going to be asking starting today. We're going to be asking this for the next about 7 weeks. You're going to be hearing this a lot at church. And kind of it's being born out of this thought, this devotion. And that's the question, who's your one? All right. I want to encourage you to be devoted to bringing Jesus to people, but all too often we get so focused on the many that we miss the ones. And so over the course of the next 7 weeks, we have our outreaches coming up where we're going to be building toward Friend Day, which is October 1st. And you'll have more information about all this as it gets closer. But really just want to ask you, who's one person that you know that's a friend, maybe an acquaintance that maybe could become a better friend? Who's one person that you know that doesn't know Christ? Maybe you begin praying now for an opportunity, even this week, to present Jesus to them. So who's one person that you could be praying for and presenting Christ to? And then who's one person that you do know that knows Jesus? They are saved.
Yeah.
But maybe you haven't been investing Jesus in that friendship like you could. Who's one person that you know that knows the Lord that you could say, you know, I'm going to start talking to them about an area of growth in my life. And all of that being born out of this lesson of being a devoted friend. So I hope that this whole series would be a help to you. I know I want friends that are forgiving, that are real, that have integrity, that are enjoyable, that are nice, and that are devoted. And I hope that we would want to be those friends. So today, as we wrap up, you're going to go into your groups, have some discussion questions and some handouts there that you can talk through this area of being devoted, as well as looking at some of our outreaches coming up.
Yep.
And we're going to have some, on the handout, there will be some announcements about that as that draws closer in the next 7 weeks. But today, bringing devotion into our friendships, who's that one person you can be devoted to witness to, and who's that one person you can be devoted of just bringing Christ into that relationship. So, Brian, anything else?
Looking forward to church at the lake next Sunday.
Yes.
So don't show up to church, this building. Don't show up here next Sunday. You'll be lonely.
The 20th, yeah. So Church at the Lake, the 20th, 10 a.m., one service for all of our groups and all of our church family, everybody. So It'll be a good day. All right. Well, have a great night. Enjoy your discussion time. We'll talk to you later.